Welcome to the Tbt Agreement. My name is Tandiwe Madube Pasimwendabai. I'll be taking you in the Tbt Agreement. So the module content will be the TBT, the agreement on the technical barriers to trade, and then we'll look at the scope and coverage of the agreement on technical barriers to trade. So we'll ask ourselves, what are technical barriers to trade? So motor vehicles to be equipped with seat belts, that is a technical regulation. When we look at labeling of a product, then we'll be looking at a standard. A standard. So when it comes to regulations, say a motor vehicle should be equipped with seat belts, we are looking at safety, the safety aspect of it. When we're looking at labeling, also we want to know what that product is all about. So then we'll be looking at the human health when in regards to, say, cigarettes. Okay. So bottled water for human consumption, specifications on content, bottling and labeling requirements for as consumer information is also a technical regulation. Okay. So the background of the TBT agreement, you want to know what is this TBT agreement? Earlier, there is actually a presentation on the WTO. So at the WTO, there were different agreements that were built. So this one particular is just looking at the TBT agreement. So now the background. So the WTO agreement on technical barriers to trade entered into force on the 1st of January 1995 as one of the WTO agreements under Annex 1 of the agreement established at the World Trade Organization. The TBT agreement strengthened and clarified the provisions of the Standards Code, the original plurilateral 1979 Tokyo Round agreements on technical barriers to trade, governing regulations and standards. So then, what does the TBT agreement do? So the TBT agreement is binding on all members of the WTO. It shares many of its fundamental principles with other WTO agreements, like non-discrimination, promoting predictability of access to markets, technical assistance, special and differential treatments for developing countries in the implementation of the agreement. However, a TBT agreement also includes features specific to preparation, application of regulatory measures that affect trade in goods. It strongly encourages that the use of international standards, and it emphasizes the need to avoid unnecessary barriers to trade. Moreover, the technical agreement contains detailed provisions to clarify the entire process of preparation, the adopting and applying of TBT measures, such as the regulatory life cycle. So the preparation, the adoption, and the application is what we are calling a regulatory life cycle of a technical regulation. So these provisions, together with the guidance developed by members in a step-by-step fashion over the years, has enabled the TBT agreement to become a unique multilateral instrument for addressing trade-related regulatory measures. Continue. Why an agreement on technical barriers to trade? So the phrase technical barriers to trade refers to the use of domestic regulatory process as a means of protecting domestic producers. The TBT agreement seeks to assure that mandatory products regulations, voluntary product standards, as well as conformity assessment procedures do not become unnecessary obstacles to international trade and are not employed to obstruct trade either. Okay. So the TBT agreement seeks to achieve a fine balance between permitting members the regulatory autonomy to protect legitimate interests through the use of technical regulations, standards, and conformity assessments, and assuring that technical regulations, standards, and conformity assessment procedures do not become unnecessary obstacles to trade. If the TBT agreement is applied too strictly, the legitimate policy interests of members will be frustrated. If the TBT is applied too laxly, technical regulations may be used for protectionist purposes, and the gains of members have achieved through progressive rounds of tariffs reductions may be lost. Purpose of the TBT agreement. It's there to avoid necessary obstacles to international trade, and as well as allowing for regulatory autonomy to fulfill legitimate interests. That's by promoting international standards. So there's that uh, uh, balance. So we ask ourselves, what are these legitimate objectives? Okay, it is recognized that no country shall be prevented from taking measures necessary to ensure interior the quality of its exports, the protection of human, animal, or plant life or health, the protection of the environment, the prevention of deceptive practices at levels it considers appropriate, and also the protection of its essential security interests. Legitimate objectives. We have the national security requirements. These are regulations that require that facilities are registered, especially like a regulation requiring that registration of facilities that manufacture or import or export dangerous chemicals, substances are registered. Okay. There's also the issue of protection of human health or safety. This is a technical regulation, like a technical regulations, for instance, a technical regulation on booster seats, okay? Or e.g., like if we bring it down to Zambia, the importation of used motor vehicles, also, that's a regulation. It's there to protect human health and safety. Another example I'll give are warning labels on toys. You'll find that there are toys that will say, not for children below the age of 5. So that one is also, it also falls under protection of human health and safety. Another third legitimate objective is therefore the protection of animal or plant life or health. Regulation that endangered species, for instance, fish, reach a certain length before they are caught. You know, establishment also of fishing seasons or fishing techniques. You do realize that there are the like in the case of Zambia, there are times where there's a fishing season and there are times where they will ban to say no, this time we're not supposed to do the fishing, or so that at least we allow for the fish to grow to mature. And also the fishing techniques. There is equipment rather that is used for fishing. Obviously, you cannot use a mosquito net to go and fish, because then you even get the premature fish, and thereby you cause the production of the fish to decrease. The other one, the fourth legitimate objective would be the protection of the environment, where you find the regulation of recycling of paper and plastic products. There is also a regulation on levels of motor vehicle emission. So all these fall under protection of the environment. Okay. So we are supposed to be using biodegradable packaging materials as opposed to just plastic bags. Okay. The fifth legitimate objective is the prevention of deceptive practices, a regulation on labeling of maximum retail price on packaged goods. So we'll go to the structure of the TBT agreement. We want to know, what is this TBT agreement? We've already outlined what it is. And then now we want to find out what is the structure for this agreement. So the structure, I would say it's really straightforward. It has a set of provisions. So the first set of provisions concerns the preparation, the adoption, and the application of technical regulations. These are found in Articles 2 and 3 of the TBT agreement. So this is how the structure will go. The first set is Articles 2 and 3 that will actually just be looking at the preparation, adoption, and application of technical regulations. So the key thing here is technical regulation. The second set will deal with the preparation, also the adoption and application of standards. So Article 4 is dealing with standards and the code of practice for preparation, adoption, and application of standards. And these are also found in Annex 3. So the first set is technical regulations. The second set is talking about the standards. And then the third set relates to conformity assessment. So conformity assessment is found in Articles 5 to 9. The remainder of the agreement, that's Article 10 to 14, deals with transparency. It will deal with technical assistance. It will deal with the special and differential treatment. It will deal with dispute settlement, and it will also deal with institutional issues with the work of the TBT committee. In addition, Annex 1 contains definition of the terms used in the agreement, and Annex 2 also lays down provisions referred to technical experts group. Annex 3 will deal with the preparation, adoption, application of standards by standardizing bodies. So this is the structure. It's all articles, okay? So like for Article 1, it's general provisions, and these ones are only dealing with technical regulations. From the preparation, it's the adoption, and the application of these regulations by the central government bodies. Okay? And Article 3 will deal with the preparation, adoption, application of technical regulations by local government bodies and non-governmental bodies. So anything you need to understand when applying these provisions, you need to know that these provisions are falling under a technical regulation, and these ones are falling under a standard, or these ones are falling under conformity assessment. So like for Articles 5, these are procedures for assessment of conformity by central government bodies. Article 6, this is the recognition of the conformity assessment by the central government bodies. Article 7, also procedures of assessment of conformity by local government bodies. Article 9, procedures for assessment of conformity by non-governmental bodies. Article 9, it will talk about the international and regional systems. So then, from Article 10 to 12, this will talk about the information and assistance. So information about technical regulations, standards, and conformity assessment procedures are found in Article 10 under the information and assistance. Then Article 11 also, we talk about the technical assistance to other members. Article 12 will talk about the special and differential treatment of developing country members. So then we have the institutions, consultations, and dispute settlements being found in Article 13, the Committee on Technical Barriers to Trade. So then we will now look at the scope and the coverage of the TBT agreement. We'll begin with the coverage of the TBT agreement. So the TBT measures, remember, we have the technical regulations, we have standards, and then we have conformity assessment procedures. All these are related to all products, industrial and agriculture, and these can be found in Article 1.3 of the provisions. And then the following are not covered by the TBT agreement. That's the services, government procurement, or SPS. SPS measures are not covered in the TBT agreement. The government procurement is not covered in the TBT agreement, and services are not covered in the TBT agreement. So the TBT agreement, it applies to all technical regulations, which is they're mandatory. Standards in nature, we know that they are voluntary. So the TBT only caters for technical regulations, and standards which are voluntary, and conformity assessment. And just to echo that SPS is not applicable to the TBT provisions. We'll talk about the SPS. So with the TBT agreement, it talks about just the standard technical regulations and conformity assessment, whereas the SPS is there to protect human or animal life from risks arising from additives, contaminants, toxins, or disease-causing organisms in their food, beverages, foodstuffs. In short, food safety. Okay. It also protects human life from plant or animal-carried diseases and like zoonosis. Another also what SPS is there to do is to protect animal or plant life from pests, diseases, or disease-causing organisms. It's also there to protect a country from damage caused by entry, establishment, or spread of pests. So what is the relationship between SPS and TBT? So the SPS and the TBT are mutually exclusive, as in when you look at Article 1.5 of the Tbt Agreement. So the SPS agreement covers all measures intended to protect human or animal health from foodborne risks, human health from animal or plant carried diseases, animals and plants from pests or diseases, or to prevent other damage from pests. Whereas the TBT agreement covers all technical regulations, standards, and conformity assessment procedures, regardless of their objectives, except when these sanitary or phytosanitary measures are defined by Annex A of the SPS agreement. An example of a TBT and SPS, there are times where you find one product will have SPS and TBT. An example is such as maybe bottled, let's say bottled water, okay? So a TBT will look at the shape, of that product, of that, let's say bottle, to allow for stocking or display, okay? It also looks at the permitted size to ensure that the standard volume is what it is. So if this bottle, for instance, is 500, say, suppose 500 mils in it, that is a TBT requirement. So you have to label it, okay? It has to show to say, okay, fine, this is a 500 mils bottle. Whereas the same bottle, the same product, when it comes to SPS, it will look at the residue or disinfectants so that that water is not contaminated. So you'll find that one product will have SPS and will have TBT. In simpler terms, TBT will look at the maybe the shape, the volume, or the size of that product. Whereas SPS will look at the residues of that water. It will actually look at that product in that bottle. So it will look for, is this water contaminated? Okay. The materials used, can they be used is it safe to use for human health? Is it safe to use for human consumption? Is this material used, okay? Is the material used safe for human health? Another example would be an orange, for instance. The maximum size of that fruit will be a TBT, okay? The packaging will be a TBT. But when it comes to SPS, they'll be looking at anti-pest spray, okay, on that orange. So how far does this TBT go in terms of institutional coverage? So a wide range of bodies and systems, governments and non-governmental organizations, TBT is applied. The agreement goes as far as that. We'll look at maybe the central government. Members are fully responsible for ensuring that central government bodies comply with the obligations regarding technical regulations and conformity assessment procedures. This is the central government. Members also shall ensure that central government standardizing bodies accept and comply with the code of practice for the preparation, the adoption, and the application of those standards, okay? The codes of practices. So if ministries, departments, or anybody subjected to control, okay, subjected to the control of the central government in respect to the activity in question. So the TBT will cover central government. It will also cover local government, where members are also responsible and shall take responsible, reasonable measures to ensure that these bodies compliance with the agreement's provision in technical regulations and conformity assessments, as well as ensure that such bodies accept and comply with the code of practice. So that it covers the central government, it covers the local government, it also covers regional and international bodies. This is so because the members shall take reasonable measures as well to ensure that they comply with the Articles 5 and 6 on the conformity assessment, and shall only rely on such bodies' conformity assessment procedures if they comply with these two provisions. Okay, that's provision 5 and 6. Also, it goes aside from the regional and international bodies, it will also go to non-governmental entities. Even there, it's the same thing, it's the same principle. Members shall take reasonable measures to ensure that they accept and comply with the code of practice and relevant provisions of the agreement, particularly the Articles 5 and 6 as well, and that's the conformity assessment, and shall only rely on such bodies' conformity assessment procedures if they comply with these two provisions. We look at the scope because we remember the technical regulation, maybe we define it. It's a document which lays down product characteristics and their related processes and production methods with which compliance is mandatory. So the key thing is when you think of technical regulation, think mandatory. When it comes to standards, it's also a document approved by a recognized body that provides for common and repeated use, rules for products and related processes and production methods, which compliance is mandatory. This one compliance is voluntary, whereas technical regulation is mandatory. Okay, and then conformity assessment procedures. Any procedure used directly or indirectly to determine that relevant requirements in technical regulation or standards are fulfilled. What is this saying? So we have a technical regulation, but then how do you know that this product is actually complying to what is stipulated in the technical regulation or a standard? This is where now conformity assessment comes in. So a technical regulation, maybe we would want to say, but how do we establish that a measure is a technical regulation? So a technical regulation, the document must be able to be identifiable. A document must apply to an identifiable product or a group of products. Okay? It also must lay down one or more characteristics of that product. That's a technical regulation. And also, compliance is mandatory. Okay? An example of a technical regulation is where a law stating that all product packaging must be recyclable is an example of a technical regulation. Whereas a standard, an example also maybe would be like a government guideline saying that all eggs, okay, all eggs should just weigh 62 grams. Okay, so it will say all eggs, a standard will actually say all eggs, okay, weighing 62 grams or more are entitled to be labeled grade A, okay, first grade. But that's not to say the eggs that will weigh less will not be sold. But if you're going to put them in categories, it means that all the guidelines, the government will say, all eggs weighing 62 grams or more are entitled to be labeled grade A. So this is the first, the cream of the crop. And then the other eggs that will lay less than that, there's no problem, but they cannot be considered to be grade A, but still they can be sold. So it's not really cast in stone. So whether they weigh 62, they'll all be sold. They weigh less, they'll be sold. Except when it comes to grading, the eggs that will weigh 62 grams will actually be considered grade A. So I think by now we know to say there's a difference between the regulation and the standard. The key thing, technical regulations, mandatory. Standards, voluntary. Conformity assessment. Any procedure used directly or indirectly to determine the relevant requirements of, in technical regulations or standards are fulfilled. So conformity assessment procedures, okay, are the sampling, the testing, the inspection, evaluation, verification, assurance of conformity, registration, accreditation, as well as, I mean, there can be a combination of two or three. For instance, if we have inspectors, okay, mandated to say to regulate and to make sure that, okay, fine, this thing is complying to this. So how do they know? This is where now they go and inspect, they get random samples, then they have that product tested. Okay? So this is now where the conformity, these are the conformity assessment procedures. So it's not stuck to just one to say sampling or it's just the testing in the labs. No, no, no. So conformity assessment, okay, is used to prove to regulators as well as consumers that a product complies with a technical regulation or a standard. And these conformity assessments, they can be performed by manufacturers or suppliers themselves or independent laboratories or accreditation of bodies and all those that are able to actually do conformity assessment procedures. An example of conformity assessment procedures. Assume a country requires, as a condition for the sale of spirits, that the correct alcoholic content be displayed on the bottle. Okay? This is now a country. They say, okay, fine. This alcohol, if you have to sell this, make sure that you have put the alcoholic content on the bottle, meaning you have to display the alcoholic content on the bottle. So an official test of the beverage to determine that the correct alcoholic content being displayed, okay, would be a conformity assessment procedure implemented to verify with a technical regulation. So that act of trying to verify to say if what they have displayed is what is exactly is what is there. Um, so we've looked at the Tbt Agreement background. They've looked at the structure, which is just a provision so that you know where these are found. People are just not doing it out of the blues. Then we've looked at the coverage, how far does the Tbt Agreement go, and also the scope of the Tbt Agreement. I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you.